She never thought life would take her into such a strange secret. It all started in the most normal way. She often visited her best friend's house after school. They would laugh, watch movies, or just sit and talk for hours. For her, that house felt like a second home. The kitchen always smelled of fresh food. The living room had soft lights, and there was always a warm feeling in the air. But one person in that house slowly began to change her life, without her even realizing it. The father. He was different from most men she knew. Strong, confident, and always dressed in a way that showed he was important. He carried himself with calmness, like someone who had lived through many battles in life and won them. People respected him. Some even feared him because of his wealth and power. But to her, he was not just a rich man. He was someone who looked at her like she mattered, even when the world did in single quotes at first. Their talks were short. A hello in the hallway, a polite smile at the dinner table. But small things can grow into big things, especially when hearts are involved. One evening, while her best friend was upstairs, he asked her simple questions. "How is school going? Are you happy these days?" His voice was deep but gentle. She answered shyly, but inside she felt something unusual. No one had ever asked her in such a careful way, as if her feelings were important. She tried to ignore it. She told herself he was just being nice, nothing more. But the next time she visited, she caught him looking at her a little longer than before. His eyes stayed on her as she laughed with his daughter. She felt her heart beat faster, and she quickly looked away. It was confusing. He was her best friend's father, a man much older than her, someone she should respect and keep distance from. But why did her chest feel heavy whenever he was near? Days turned into weeks, and the feeling only grew. She found herself noticing his smile, the way he stood by the window with a thoughtful look, the calm way he spoke to people. It was different from the boys her age, who were careless and restless. He had a presence that drew her in, and slowly, she began to wait for his attention. A simple word from him could brighten her whole day. One night, she came over when her friend had gone out for a while. She waited in the living room, and he walked in. The room was quiet, only the soft sound of a clock ticking on the wall. He asked her if she wanted something to drink, and she nodded. When he handed her the glass, their hands touched for just a second. It was nothing, yet it felt like everything. Her skin burned where his fingers brushed against hers. She quickly pulled back, afraid of what she felt, but he didn't seem surprised. He only gave a small smile, the kind of smile that carried secrets. She tried to hide her feelings. She told herself this was wrong. She reminded herself that he was her best friend's father, but her heart refused to listen to reason. Every time she was near him, her emotions betrayed her. She laughed too much at his jokes. Her voice trembled when she answered him, and her eyes searched for his when she thought no one noticed. One evening, her friend was busy upstairs, and she sat alone in the living room reading a book. He came in and sat across from her. "You read a lot," he said softly. She looked up and nodded. "Books help me escape," she replied. He leaned back, studying her carefully. "You're wiser than most people your age." Those words sank into her heart. For the first time, someone saw her not as a child, not as just a friend's companion, but as a person with depth. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing second. She lowered her eyes to the book, but her hands were shaking. She could feel his gaze, warm yet dangerous. Something inside her shifted at that moment. She realized this was no longer simple admiration. This was something else, something forbidden. From that day on, her visits to the house felt different. She no longer saw just the home of her best friend. She saw the man who lived there, the one who had unknowingly taken a place in her heart. And every time she crossed the doorway, she carried both excitement and fear. Excitement for the chance to see him again, and fear of the truth she was hiding even from herself. By the time she admitted it silently in her own heart, it was already too late. She had fallen into something she never planned. It was not just respect, not just curiosity. It was love, a love she couldn't tell anyone about, a love that could change everything if discovered. And yet, she couldn't stop herself from stepping closer to the fire. The days that followed felt heavier for her. She tried to convince herself that what happened in the living room, the way their hands touched, the way he looked at her, was just a passing moment. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it meant nothing. But her heart knew better. Each time she returned to the house, that invisible thread between them grew stronger. Her best friend still treated her the same, laughing, sharing secrets, making silly plans. But she could no longer look at the house in the same way. Every corner of it held memories of his presence. The sound of his footsteps, the scent of his cologne that lingered in the air. The calm way he moved around it all left her restless. One evening, she arrived earlier than usual. Her friend was not home yet, but the door was unlocked. She stepped in quietly, unsure if she should wait outside. But then she heard his voice from the study. "Come in," he said when he noticed her. His tone was warm, not commanding, but it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. She walked into the study, where the shelves were lined with books and the desk was scattered with papers. He looked up at her from behind the desk, his expression softer than she expected. "You're here early," he said. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. I didn't want to wait outside." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then he pushed the papers aside and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me," he said, "do you always hide behind your smile?" His words cut straight into her heart. She froze, not knowing what to say. No one had ever asked her something like that. No one had seen through her laughter to the pain she carried deep inside. Her eyes burned, and before she could stop herself, she whispered. Sometimes smiling is easier than explaining. She looked down, embarrassed, wishing she hadn't spoken. But when she raised her eyes again, he wasn't judging her. He was watching her with a kind of understanding that made her chest ache. "Life isn't always kind," he said softly, "but don't let it teach you to hide yourself." She wanted to reply, but her voice trembled. Instead, she sat down in the chair across from him. They really talked for the first time. She told him about her dreams, her struggles, the way she often felt invisible to everyone except her best friend. He listened without interrupting, his attention steady and full. It was the kind of listening she had never experienced before. As the minutes passed, the distance between them seemed to shrink, though neither moved closer. She felt her guard breaking. His presence was dangerous, but it was also safe. It was both at once, and that contradiction pulled her deeper. When her best friend finally arrived, the spell broke. She quickly left the study, her heart pounding. For the rest of the evening, she forced herself to laugh and act normal. But inside, she replayed every word, every glance, every second of that conversation. That night, lying awake in her own bed, she admitted something she had been too afraid to say even in her thoughts. She was falling for him, not just because of his power or his wealth, but because of how he made her feel seen. It was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. The next time she visited, she tried to avoid him. She stayed close to her best friend, avoided the study, avoided the kitchen when he was there. But fate doesn't always listen to reason. As she left that evening, he caught her by the door. "You seem quiet," he said gently. She looked at him, her heart racing. "I'm fine," she lied. He tilted his head slightly, as though he could see straight through her words. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said. Then, after a pause, his voice dropped lower. "But you should be careful. Some things once started cannot be undone." Her breath caught. It was not a confession, not a declaration, but it was close. Too close. She walked away that night shaken, but deep inside, she knew the truth. He felt something too. Maybe he would never say it aloud. Maybe he would try to bury it under his responsibilities and his reputation. But it was there, alive between them, and once that kind of fire begins, it is almost impossible to put out. Her days began to feel like two different lives. One life was normal, filled with routine talks with her best friend, laughter at school, and the simple joys of youth. The other life was silent, but far more powerful, an unspoken bond with a man. She should never have allowed herself to think about. It was like living in a double world. On the outside, nothing looked unusual. She still came over, still acted like the loyal best friend. But in her heart, things had already crossed into dangerous territory. Every glance, every word, every shared silence between them carried more meaning than anyone else could see. She noticed how careful he had become. He rarely spoke to her when his daughter was in the room. He avoided long eye contact, avoided conversations that might seem too personal. But those very limits only made their connection stronger. The stolen moments were worth more than hours of open company. One afternoon, her best friend rushed out to meet someone, leaving her behind for a short while. She sat in the living room, pretending to scroll through her phone. He entered quietly, almost as if he had been waiting for this chance. "You're alone?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a weight she understood too well. She nodded, unable to hide the nervous tremble in her hands. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, he sat down across from her. For a moment, they didn't speak. The ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner, and the sound of her own heartbeat filled the silence. Finally, he said, "Do you realize what you're doing?" Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" she whispered. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You're walking a path that could hurt you." His words should have scared her. They should have pulled her back to safety. But instead, they pulled her closer. She looked at him, her voice trembling but firm. "Then why don't you stop me?" He froze for a second. That question hung in the air like a blade. His lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face, clearly torn. The truth was there unspoken but undeniable. He felt it too. The sound of footsteps upstairs broke the moment. Her best friend was back. Both of them straightened instantly, masks slipping back into place. She grabbed her phone and forced a laugh when her friend entered the room, while he calmly picked up a magazine as though nothing had happened. That night, she lay awake replaying his words. "You're walking a path that could hurt you." He was right, but it was too late. The path was already under her feet, and turning back felt impossible. The secret grew heavier with time. They began exchanging looks when no one was watching. Sometimes, his hand brushed against hers when passing something at the dinner table, and though it lasted only a second, it sent waves through her body. She started memorizing the times he usually came home, hoping to catch a glimpse of him before anyone else noticed. But the more they hid, the stronger it became. She felt alive in those moments. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also the only time she felt truly seen. One evening, when her best friend had fallen asleep early, she went to get water in the kitchen. He was already there, standing by the counter with a glass in his hand. She froze, unsure if she should leave, but he looked at her with that same quiet intensity. "You should go back upstairs," he said, though his tone didn't match his words. She shook her head slightly. "Why do you always push me away but never let me go?" His grip tightened on the glass, and for a second, she thought he might finally break the silence between them. But then he sighed and looked away. Because some lines, once crossed, can never be erased. Her heart pounded. She wanted to ask him if he regretted the feelings they both knew existed. But instead, she whispered, "Then why does it feel like we've already crossed it?" The silence after her words was louder than anything. He didn't answer. He didn't need to when she finally walked back upstairs. Her hands shook so much she could barely hold the glass of water. She knew this secret love wasn't just in her imagination anymore. It was real. It was alive. And it was only a matter of time before the world around them began to notice. The secret between them was no longer light. It had grown heavy, like a shadow that followed her everywhere she went. She could feel it when she laughed with her best friend, when she sat at the dinner table, even when she tried to sleep at night. The guilt was there, whispering in her ear. But stronger than guilt was the pull she felt toward him. And that pull was becoming harder to hide. That it started with small things her best friend noticed. "You're acting strange these days," she said one afternoon. "Always distracted, always lost in thought. Is there something you're not telling me?" The young woman laughed it off, blaming stress from school. But inside, panic rose. She could not afford to slip. But secrets have a way of leaving clues. Her friend caught her once staring too long at the study door. Another time, she blushed when he casually entered the room. Tiny signs, but enough to plant suspicion. Then came the moment that nearly broke the wall of silence. One evening, the three of them were sitting in the living room. The father was reading a newspaper, the best friend scrolling on her phone. As she was quietly watching TV, at some point, he looked up from the paper, his eyes meeting hers across the room. It was only for a second, but the intensity of it was unmistakable. Her best friend noticed. She didn't say anything right away, but later that night, she asked, "Why were you looking at my dad like that?" The young woman's heart almost stopped. She forced a laugh, shaking her head quickly. "What are you talking about? I wasn't." But she knew her voice had betrayed her. From that day on, her best friend grew sharper, watching her with questioning eyes. The house no longer felt safe. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Every word, every glance, every step had to be measured. And yet, the pull between them only deepened. One late evening, after her friend had gone upstairs, she found herself in the garden, sitting under the dim lights. He came out silently and stood near her. Neither spoke for a moment. The night was cool, the smell of flowers mixed with the faint sound of crickets. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes heavy with all the words she couldn't say. "Do you regret this?" she whispered. He didn't answer at once. His gaze drifted toward the house, where the lights from the upstairs windows glowed softly. Finally, he said, "Regret is too small a word for something this dangerous." Her chest ached at his words, but she couldn't stop herself from asking, "Then why don't you end it?" He turned to her, his face hard with conflict. "Because ending it would mean pretending it never existed. And I can't do that anymore." The silence after that confession was unbearable. It felt like the ground beneath them had shifted. She wanted to reach for him, but the sound of a door opening upstairs made her freeze. Her best friend was awake. They both pulled back instantly, returning to their safe masks. Though their hearts raced with what had just been admitted, the next day, rumors began to stir. Neighbors whispered about seeing the millionaire father with a young girl, not knowing who she was. At school, she heard small comments, harmless at first but sharp enough to sting. "You spend a lot of time at your friend's house, don't you?" someone asked with a sly smile. Her chest tightened. How much longer could they keep this hidden? The weight of the secret was now pressing from every side. She found herself lying more often to her best friend, avoiding direct questions, forcing laughter where it didn't belong. Each lie made her feel more trapped, yet every stolen glance from him reminded her why she was still there. One night, as she prepared to leave, her best friend suddenly blocked the door. Her eyes were sharp, filled with suspicion. "I need to ask you something," she said. The young woman's breath caught. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Her friend crossed her arms. "Do you like my dad?" The world seemed to stop. Her throat dried. Her heart pounded so hard she thought her chest would burst. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off like before, but this time her friend's eyes were too sharp, too searching. Before she could answer, the father's voice came from behind. "It's late. Let her go home." His calm tone broke the tension, but his eyes met hers, briefly a warning, a plea, and a promise all at once. She walked out into the night, her legs shaking. The secret was no longer safe. The wall that protected them was cracking, and she knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The days of hiding were over. Secrets have a way of finding light, no matter how carefully they are buried. She had felt the cracks forming for weeks, but nothing prepared her for the moment when everything finally came crashing down. It happened on an ordinary evening. She had come over like always, smiling for her best friend, pretending everything was normal. But the air inside the house was different, heavy, silent. Her best friend wasn't laughing as she usually did. Instead, she sat on the couch with her arms crossed, her eyes sharp and full of suspicion. "My dad talks to you more than he talks to me," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "Why is that?" The young woman froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Before she could answer, he entered the room. His presence only made the moment heavier. Her friend looked between them, her expression darkening. "Is there something I should know?" The silence that followed said more than words ever could. That was the night the truth slipped out, not in clear words, not in full confessions, but in the unspoken understanding that could no longer be denied. Her best friend's face turned pale, then red with anger. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Of all people, you." Tears burned the young woman's eyes, but she couldn't lie anymore. "I never meant for it to happen," she said softly. "I didn't plan this, it just happened." The betrayal cut deep. Her best friend stormed out, leaving the two of them standing in the wreckage of their secret. For the first time, she saw the weight in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes. He was a powerful man in the world outside, but here, in this moment, he looked broken. The days that followed were filled with chaos. Her best friend stopped speaking to her completely. Neighbors whispered louder. Whispers became rumors. Rumors became stories. People looked at her differently, some with pity, some with judgment. She felt the sting of every stare. He, too, faced consequences. Meetings with business partners grew colder. Questions were raised about his judgment, his choices. He tried to shield her from the worst of it, but she could see the toll it was taking. And yet, through all the noise, he never turned against her. "This is my fault as much as yours," he told her one evening when they met quietly, away from the eyes of the world. His voice was tired, but his eyes were steady. "I should have protected you better. Instead, I pulled you into this storm." Her heart ached. "Would you change it if you could?" she asked. He was silent for a long time before answering. "No," he whispered, "because for the first time in years, I felt alive. And that was because of you." Those words stayed with her. They gave her comfort, even as everything else fell apart. But life doesn't pause for forbidden love. Eventually, choices had to be made. She realized she could not rebuild her friendship, not with the truth out in the open. She had lost someone who once felt like family, and that wound would remain forever. He, too, could not escape the judgment of the world. Though his wealth and power protected him from complete ruin, his name was no longer spotless. In the end, what they had was no longer a secret, but it could not survive under the weight of exposure. They both knew it. Their story had burned bright, but it had burned too hot to last. When they finally parted ways, it wasn't with anger or regret. It was with quiet understanding. He looked at her one last time and said, "You'll carry this with you, always. But don't let it break you. Let it teach you." She walked away that night with tears in her eyes, but also with a strange kind of strength. The world saw her as a girl who made a mistake, but in her heart, she knew the truth. She had experienced something rare, something that changed the way she would see love, loyalty, and herself forever. Years later, when she thought back to those days, she didn't see just the pain or the betrayal. She saw the lessons hidden inside them. She learned how dangerous desire could be, how fragile trust was, and how powerful love could feel even when it was forbidden. And though she never told the story openly, she carried it within her, an untold chapter that shaped who she became. Because sometimes, the loves that cannot last are the ones that leave the deepest marks.